Welcome to Provoking Peace, a podcast by the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, where we bring Muslim and Jewish women and our allies into conversation to explore what it really takes to build peace in ourselves, our communities, and our world.
We go beyond the headlines to speak with people who are living this work every day: activists, educators, artists, faith leaders, and more.
We're here to ask bold questions, listen deeply, and invite you to join us in disrupting assumptions and stereotypes, one Muslim and
one Jewish woman at a time.
Welcome to a new episode of Provoking Peace podcast. We have again wonderful guests today. Ali and I are here with Celene Ibrahim and Vanessa Avery. Welcome, and it's a pleasure and honor to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So we're going to just do a quick introduction so that everyone listening has a little bit of context for our conversation. So I'll introduce Dr. Ibrahim, who is a multidisciplinary scholar specializing in Islamic intellectual history, gender studies, comparative religion, and ethics. She's best known for her monograph, Women and Gender in the Quran. Dr. Ibrahim is a trusted voice for educational content on Islam, interreligious relations, and religion in the public sphere for media outlets, including NPR, PBS, and Netflix. Dr. Ibrahim is currently a faculty member at Groton School in the Department of Religious Studies and Philosophy, where she also holds an appointment as Muslim chaplain. Dr. Ibrahim earned her bachelor's at Princeton University in Near Eastern Studies and a degree in divinity from Harvard University as a presidential scholar focusing on Muslim religious and civic leadership. She earned a doctorate in Arabic and Islamic civilizations at Brandeis University, where she also earned a dual master's degree in women's and gender studies and Near Eastern and Judaic studies.
And it's my pleasure to introduce Vanessa Avery. For more than 25 years, Vanessa has been a builder of interfaith relations, a pioneer and advocate for workplace religious diversity and inclusion, and a religious studies scholar and educator. Currently, Vanessa is the executive director of Sharing Sacred Spaces, an interfaith organization that focuses on bringing together religious and spiritual communities to visit one another's sacred spaces, learn about each other, extend hospitality, equip themselves with some of the tools of interfaith dialogue, and build an interfaith community. She's a lecturer in interfaith engagement at Yale Divinity School, a fellow at Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, affiliate faculty at California State University, and author of numerous articles on world religions, interfaith understanding, organizational culture and religion, nonviolence, and peace. Quite amazing bios we're reading here. So it's absolutely wonderful to be with both of you here today. And I think Ali and I are a little bit intimidated the intellect that we have in this room, but we'll try to do some of our regular questions that help our audience sort of implement some of the things that you are doing in your academic work, but also doing hands-on, right? So hopefully we'll have that opportunity to go there. I'm going to just jump into the first question and start us off. So the sisterhood is really focusing on personal narratives as a way of getting to know each other and build relationships. And we really try to do that with our guests as well, to get to know you both better. We want to ask you about just sharing your personal narrative with us and how you got to this point in your life where you're at right now.
I can go ahead and jump in.
Do you want to go first, Celene?
Sure. So interreligious relations has always been a part of my life. And at first it started out as intra-religious relations because I grew up in a household that was part Protestant and part Catholic. And I went to religious schools and really was exploring my own religious identity in a Christian context. And then as I got older and got exposed to more religions, I became interested in Buddhism and Buddhist meditation. And then I was introduced to Islam and really found that Islam stuck. But then I had a background in several different religions, and that really informed the way that I was Muslim because I recognized all of these things that I carried with me that were teachings and practices from these different religions. And then as a graduate student, I was in a primarily historically Christian setting. And so I was learning Muslim ministry and Muslim religious leadership and Islamic studies in a predominantly Christian setting. And then I went off to graduate school at Brandeis, where I was working in Arabic and Islamic studies in a Near Eastern studies department that had a lot of Jewish faculty who were also practicing religious people and academics. And it was a nice fit for me because I was also negotiating these porous boundaries between being a scholar of Islamic studies and being a practicing Muslim. And I saw that reflected in the context of Brandeis, where there were not only Jewish, practicing Jewish family and Jewish religious leaders, but and then it just expanded my exposure to other Near Eastern traditions in my department. And so I began to see the rise of Islam in conversation with all of these different religious movements of the Eastern Mediterranean. So that's a little bit about how I continued to just naturally almost do interreligious relations. And as a teacher now of world history, from the origins of civilization to the present moment, I really have to throw myself into various civilizations and read on Confucianism and read Seneca and read just anything and everything is sort of now part of my mandate as a teacher of history. So it's just given me more motivation to continue this exploration.
You know how interesting as I hear you talk, Celene, I just hear so many parallels with my own journey into interreligious work. I've always been fascinated by different religious symbolisms and different languages. I grew up in a conservative Jewish home in Queens, New York, so always had a solid grounding in my own faith, but my mom was also a spiritual explorer who brought me to ashrams, Zen centers, midnight mass. She adopted a Wiccan foster child who was a teenager. So it was really interesting. And, fast forward many years, I just wanted to continue, I think, that exploration. So I studied religious studies at McGill University, first comparative religion, and then I moved into Jewish scriptures for my graduate work, focusing on biblical texts and ritual as vaccines against violence. And at the same time, I became very interested in the practice of interreligious dialogue at that point, which is, throughout my earlier years, although we did all this exploration, my Jewish identity was never really a thing. It really wasn't until college. And so I became interested in interfaith dialogue because I was typically like Celene in institutions where I was studying mostly with non-Jewish faculty, and most of my peers were non-Jewish. They were typically Christian or Muslim or secular. So I realized how essential it was for people of different faiths to share their perspectives with each other because there was so little knowledge across difference, and representing my Jewish faith as only one Jewish person, not even every different Jewish person. There were just so many misunderstandings, assumptions. And so carrying that through, I really understood the importance. And then I started my own religious diversity consulting training firm. That was 1998 when cultural training became very much it was becoming much more emphasized in the corporate workplace and universities, but no one was talking about religion.
Mhm.
So I took that on tooth and nail, and then I merged with a management consulting organization. We still work together. At times, it's really wonderful, and they're up in Cambridge. So I did that, did my PhD, was a faculty person in academia for a while, but eventually found myself in a position kind of revamping this program that had been designed by an architect named Suzanne Morgan. And I worked with Suzanne for a few years, starting 2017. We did a couple of pilots of a program she had done with the Parliament of World Religions years back, and it was just a magnificent program. It was requiring a 3-year commitment of folks, which I thought was unprecedented in interfaith work. It used architecture to explore meaning and stories and how people understand and use their sacred space. It was just magnificent, everything about it. And so Suzanne and I, looked at the impact of the pilots we then ran and incorporated in 2019. And the rest is history, really.
And Vanessa, that's actually how I met you because I was teaching a course in world history, and we happened to be in the unit on the rise of Persia, and I was teaching Zoroastrianism, and your webinar that was exploring Zoroastrian sacred spaces in North America was perfectly timed, and I had my students sign up for the webinar, and we had this robust conversation through your webinar about Zoroastrian spaces and the continuity from this early period, and so that's how we started getting in contact. So it's like these little ripples of impact.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, I remember. That's right. Taught by a Zoroastrian, no less, a Zoroastrian architect, Cyrus Rabetna, who's in Texas. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's so great.
Could you tell us just a little bit more about your program, Vanessa, so that the podcast listeners kind of understand a little bit more the context of what you're doing?
Sure. We have a few different programs. So and we do several things. Some of them are more digital media based, like webinars. We also have a documentary series, which comes with learning modules on the sacred space of different religions. So we did one on Zoroastrianism, which is the one Celene's referring to. That's a webinar series we do every year. Our main program is called the Interreligious Communities Project. We currently run that in 6 different cities, and that's a program much more intensive. It's to deal with polarization, to end bias and misunderstandings by bringing people from diverse religious backgrounds into a community that goes through a very intentional process for the time of a year, about a year. They visit one another's sacred spaces in a very intentionally designed program. Everything is very structured in what we do. And then they attend coaching sessions once a month. They're buddied up, they have homework to do. And that's where they gain the skills in interfaith dialogue. We focus heavily on listening and communication and stereotypes and the filters through which we listen and see and things like that. So the combination of the different elements through which we make these points of contact across religious difference, it's like a miracle pill if there were one, and it does take a year, but the deep friendships that are formed out of doing this, it's like a glue because we have a community. What's so incredible to me as well is in Dallas, we're just seeing they put the cart before the horse even. So we have a Sufi community who's helping an American Indian mission with certain projects. And this is before, we've even finished this. So they're seeing in each other just this beauty and helping each other, which is really all the things we want community to do. And it really is a way that I see our social fabric could be. It's an ideal. So that's what we build. And now we've scaled it so that we can address a lot more cities at the same time. For us, it was a heavy lift to be in those different places. And thank you for asking the question.
Well, thank you for sharing more about that. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how we are in this work of interfaith connections and relationship building. How important are these sort of our own human senses that we have? So the space we are in, the smells we are feeling, the stories we are sharing, right, with each other, how important it is to go deeper into that humanity that we share in these beautiful ways, really, that it's that overlap of aesthetics and beauty with spiritual beauty. So it really what you're doing is kind of resonating in so many ways. But that leads me to the question about different methods that we're all different techniques that we're all trying to use for interfaith programs. And Ellie and I were thinking that both of you dedicated your life to these programs, and you have seen change, right, through your work. And it would be wonderful if you could share with us some of your experiences and some of these techniques or methods that you've used in before and that worked, and creating these spaces and seeing the impact.
I can start off with just a very simple practice that I learned from Jennifer Peace, who is a longtime practitioner, scholar of interreligious studies. And we worked together alongside Or Rose to run an institute that was a Jewish Christian Muslim, really community building institute, but also sort of a knowledge building platform for thinking about best practices. And Jenny I'm not even sure where she got this exercise. I'm sure she was inspired by someone to develop this exercise. And then I know that Vanessa also uses this practice in some of hers, but it's just a simple structured story sharing where you're paired just in a dyad, and one person is the story giver and one person is the story receiver. And the exercise focuses a lot on listening, which I know is something that Vanessa and I also, when we co-lead programs, we incorporate into our programs. But it's a very intentional listening, and the story giver can be, well, I should say that the person facilitating the exercise can use any sort of prompt that would elicit a story that would get something about interreligious relations or something about the spiritual life of that person, or the question can be designed in multiple ways to elicit a story. And the key to this activity is that it actually is a story. So it should have some sort of plot line and a problem that gets resolved. I'm not an English teacher, but those are sort of some basic elements of a story. And the person who's the story receiver then focuses on sharing back that story. And so part
Mm.
of the deep listening, the test of how well you've deep listened, is can you recite back parts of the story? And then once that happens, and this is kind of in a structured 5-3-1 sort of minute framework, but you can be flexible on the time. The original story giver then reflects back. Did they hear anything as their story was being given back to them that helped unlock a piece of that story? Or was there a point of clarification that needed to be shared? And I've done this exercise in so many spaces with students, with people in residential communities, with all sorts of audiences. And there's oftentimes it warms the room in a way because you have this presumably somewhat vulnerable sharing, or at least a kind of chemistry that happens between the story giver and the story receiver. And it's kind of evidence that if we could only deep listen, that not, we don't, that person's story doesn't become your story, but you can, in the act of giving the story back to the person, there's empathy that happens. And if we build kind of our relationships across difference out of this space of empathy, then we end up with a deeper relationships, or just even relationships that wouldn't be likely relationships. So that's just a simple 5-minute exercise that helps to warm a room to then do further work or go a bit deeper.
I love that. I've definitely done activities that were really similar to that. And I think one of the key kind of precepts that we usually talk about in those kinds of activities is to try to think of your own story, because I think, what so happens so frequently, at least, for me, and I'm sure for others, is that when you're hearing someone else's story, you're hearing their story and you're also thinking about like how your story relates to it. So it's in a way to relate to the other person, but while you're doing that, you're not fully present in their story. So, so I know I've done exercises similar, where it's really, been very clearly, indicated, to only listen, right? To not think about yourself, to just be fully present, in their stories so that you can fully hear it. Because I think we're also used to sort of like hearing and thinking, sort of simultaneously, but that also kind of doesn't allow you to be fully present.
That's great. The listening exercises, I think, are my favorite too. We go through, actually, I think it's 4 sessions now because we've expanded the listening training because it's so valuable and effective. So we spend a couple of sessions on typical ways that we listen, and we go really deep into that in the current format. So we look at things like, Allie, you just mentioned, like the voice in our head that's kind of always chattering away with us,
Mhm.
and how it takes
So
us
active.
away from being present with people. And I always say it's good news we have it because it means we're alive, right? But we do want to thank it for sharing sometimes so that we can come back to the person we're with. That's a simple one. The other two typical ways go kind of much deeper into filters and meanings that we've created out of experiences in our lives. And most, maybe even most importantly, even these days, is binary thinking. So we listen often through binaries, which is I'm right, I make you wrong, I need to justify myself and I'm invalidating you. And so there are binaries through which we think that set us up for a divisive relationship rather than a really connected relationship. So we spend a lot of time just allowing people to think through these and reflect on them inside of our interreligious buddy system and cohorts. And then we move into the way that Celene talked about, which is I call it recreating. And I think talking about it in terms of empathy is spot on. I love that. I also think of it very theologically, from the biblical scriptures and God's creating the world through words, and I always conceive of that as, well, I get to create the other person through recreating their words. It's like I recreate their world, literally. And I just find that it's a spiritual practice at the end of the day, and such a gift to listen and really listen deeply. So we go through those processes as well. Yeah, they're really essential.
It's a rare person as well that is actually able to listen so well and to do that recreation so that you yourself feel understood. And I've just, as I reflected on my own life and my own mentors and spiritual mentors, they really had that ability to listen and reflect back to me that they had indeed listened. And sometimes in my capacity as a spiritual care provider, that's really the essence of what I'm doing. I'm just deeply listening and reflecting back that I have deeply listened. So yeah, it's an incredible the heart of some how human connection forms.
That's
And
true. And
and it's oh, go ahead, Vanessa. Yeah.
I was just going to add, because Celene, something that you brought into our work was being mindful of the body and what's happening. And Tahia, you mentioned that too before, right? Being mindful of what's emerging in the body, especially when you're in a more difficult kind of conversation and you're listening to things that create a rise in you. I think that's really important as well to become self-aware of that. Sorry, Tahia.
No, no, not at all. I can listen to both of you. This is so beautiful for a long, long time. But it also makes me think about something, Vanessa, something you said, creating a person through words, right? I thought that was amazing to to hear, and just the way it was described. At the same time, and I don't want to kind of digress too much, but would love to hear from two of you. You know, what media is doing today is polar opposite to what both of you are describing, right? Creating narratives of not only persons but whole people, in certain ways that are then absorbed. So it is really sort of you're creating balance through your work to what is happening on this other side. And if you can just comment on that, how you deal with that other side that is unfortunately much more present in our lives. Through we're exposed to so much information on a daily basis that is provided to us without that core element of deep listening, right? And it has a very different effect on all of us. So I would just love to hear what some of your reflections on that.
So it's interesting. I was, of course, not listening while Celene was talking, but while I had to prepare my answer before on what technique I was going to talk about. But the other one I thought to talk about was the stereotypes exercise that we do. And I've been doing a version of this exercise probably for 25 years with media images from that time, which was, yes, 25 years after 9/11, showing images from Time and Newsweek magazine covers, all the religious images. So I collect them in a PowerPoint. When I flow through the PowerPoint and people see these, people start crying like they never knew what images are coming at us that create these very strong stereotypes of whole groups of people. So for this past year's training, I'd been working on revising it for a few years. I finally did it. And it was so interesting because of the images now that are happening. And, I collect them and then I look for the themes and then I put them together. Okay. So what I discovered was the Muslim images, any images of Islam really, they were not too different from the ones after 9/11. They're still angry and a lot of chaos. And that's how they're portrayed, right? As a group. And the Jewish images were connected to the American flag, to America. And
Mhm.
I thought, there are no Muslim images connecting to America.
Yeah.
And when you show this to groups of people, it's kind of mind-blowing when you put it all together. And so I just wanted to say, how do we deal with that? The first way for me is always just recognizing what it is and what is the water we're swimming in. And the other thing I will say is those Time and Newsweek magazine covers. Someone who saw my presentation had a good friend who worked at Time Magazine as an editor, sent her my presentation, and you know what? Their images are very different now.
Wow.
Wow.
So that's the other thing you can do is write letters and say, "Hey, do you realize this is what you're putting into our mainstream?" It makes a difference. I don't even have Time magazine covers in my PowerPoint anymore, and I'm glad for that.
That's a uplifting story. Thanks, Vanessa. A lot of times when I'm teaching and I'm working with teenagers or young adults, I'm just hoping that some of the sensitization work that I'm doing will then make them professionals who might
Mhm.
see something and say, "Well, is this really the depiction that we want to be out there?" And, but it's really encouraging to hear you point to those ripple effects that one person at a particular media outlet with some heightened sensitivity can really help the editorial process along. So that's very encouraging.
I just wanted to follow up, Celine, a little bit, if you can share from, so what sisterhood is really trying to focus on is to bring more young people into the organization.
Mhm.
We want to continue this work and we want to mentor new generations and also learn from them, right? It's so important that we learn where they're at and learn from their own understanding at this point of the world. It would be great if you could share some of your experiences with young people and what works well, and how do you encourage them? Just to kind of, for our younger audience, it might be interesting to hear some of your experiences.
Mm. I think the students that I work with, they're very willing to question sort of power dynamics in their own environment, and they're very receptive to wanting to make connections with people who are different than they are. They sort of intuitively understand the benefit of bringing more perspectives into the room, and they want to be challenged is what I find. And I at the same time, I also find that this particular generation or the demographic that I work with, they are also a little bit pessimistic and skeptical that power relationships could ever be different or that change can actually be manifest. So I think that they are very kind of hyper aware of all of the forces that work against kind of bringing people together or changing systems of domination. And they're very good at pointing to this to the systems, and many of them want to be engaged in change processes, but at the same time, somewhat of that hope has just been sucked out of their beings. So, I mean, that's a very pessimistic answer, but this is honestly what I'm seeing.
Not a surprise to hear that, with everything that is surrounding us, and with what they grew up with, witnessing all this. So yeah, thank you.
Are there ways that you have sort of been able to connect with them and build trust with them in your relationship, as a teacher, and also talking about these really, personal, identity, issues of identity and belonging, and are there ways that you in your work, Celine, with the young people, and Vanessa, obviously, in your work with, many adults, are there ways that you've built that trust that you think could be kind of extrapolated? Whether it's doing these activities, or there are other activities you can think of, or just dialogue. So sort of any ways that you've worked to build trust that you think could other people could use as well.
Vanessa, I'll go to you in a second, but I just put such a heavy weight into the conversation. I do also want to say that I have a number of colleagues at the school where I work, and we have been very intently doing the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. That in this particular political moment, I feel like I should emphasize how much of a difference that work has made in helping to create our community on our campus. And I do find that our students are very confident in speaking from their perspective, speaking from the I perspective. They are actually good at deep listening because that has been a part of our diversity, equity, inclusion work. And so even if they are kind of skeptical about larger relations in the world, the communities that they are building on campus are, cut across socioeconomic lines, kind of ethnic lines, cut across religious lines. And in this tiny community of like, little almost 400 students, what I'm seeing is encouraging to me. And I think they are thriving. I hear they're thriving. They feel themselves thriving. So, as much as they're skeptical about the world, they're building something beautiful with each other.
I think Celene is more the expert on the younger age groups than I am. We did work in a private school who was interested in our listening modules. So we adapted them for that age group. And actually, it went extraordinarily well. We got all the survey feedback from the school. We trained the teachers to run the exercise, so I wasn't there that day. But the feedback was phenomenal, and the students really did learn a lot. We do it on one of the exercises is on controversial topics, and I forget what all is on the list, but instead of like the death penalty, which we use for adults, we did something like, gym class should be double time, or people shouldn't sit by the lockers during lunch. I mean, there were, much more high school oriented things, and really impressed with what they got from the exercise. So Granted, it wasn't interfaith work particularly or specifically, but these things are certainly, as Celene is doing, very adaptable to the younger folks.
I feel like the listening across difference, it's just as essential to a school curriculum as sort of math or reading and writing. And it's, it's difficult to maybe mainstream some of these practices, or maybe some school environments are able to do it more readily than others. But if anything of this interreligious dialogue work can be applicable in wider settings, this is where I would first point to the value of what we've been doing in interreligious studies and interreligious dialogue for wider communities.
I had forgotten actually briefly, but I I have a 10-year-old, and last year there was a, you know, parents bring your parents in to talk about their work week. So so I was invited in, and I thought, "How do I talk about this for 3rd grade?" And there is an organization called Spiritual Playdate. They do have amazing resources for young children. So I used their wheel on the golden rule. Every kid wanted to touch the mouse to spin the wheel. So that was a huge hit. And then the other, just for anyone who wants to do this, I think, go do this with your 9-year-old. The other thing that I created for them was this little quiz on sacred architecture. So I gave them descriptions to read of different kinds of religious buildings. Like, if you're looking at this building, it might look like a mountain range. And then I would show a slide, and they would have to guess from the descriptions what religion that building belonged to. And it was really great. They loved it. It was like a kind of a challenge to figure it out, and they learned stuff, and then they would say, "Oh, we went to Turkey last year, and we saw that mosque," and, it was really great. So,
And yeah, as you pointed out earlier, the aesthetic dimension, I think, is just this wonderful way in. And as much as kind of teaching religion in school is stigmatized and is so controversial, it's cultural literacy. And I think that when you show people the beauty of humanity in all these different forms, and it just really enhances, I think, the educational curriculum for the kids. And I worry for students who don't get exposed to kind of this diversity of the world, and because that's a real recipe for kind of thinking oneself superior when you don't even know what else is out there.
Absolutely. And I cannot agree more with both of you. I usually say we have separated mind from the heart in every aspect of our educational systems in our life, that what you're bringing into this world, both of you, is exactly sort of a antidote to that, right? Because it was always like emphasis on being intellectual. You're more successful if you're using your brain without bringing emotion into what you're doing, even especially in academia, right? Both of you, that's a challenge. And I think that is definitely backfired on where we are at right now. So going back to that, making that connection is crucial. And I would love to see more of that in schools. I also just want to say that as much architecture that you're talking about and these aesthetics, as much as they're building sort of understanding of richness and diversity, they're also pointing to similarities. I just what I was thinking about. So sisterhood does these building bridges trips, that so we go to different countries, and we just went to Morocco and then to Andalusia, and the architecture of synagogues is exactly the same as architecture of the mosques, right? So it was just sort of such familiarity for both groups, or all of us being there. It was just so beautiful to see how these aesthetics of this sacred space just overlapped, and just bring the same emotion in all of us as we enter them, right? So that's another beautiful piece to this.
yeah,
That the
that's a great
same building can be used for multiple or religions, right? And it's not always a good thing. Usually it's because someone's been conquered. So not not like an ideal, but and I know that there's many situations that I've seen personally, where there's a Jewish community, for example, that doesn't have a building yet, and a church has offered or a mosque has offered to let them use their space. That there's an understanding of relationships, between religious organizations too, that can kind of build community, not just within organizations, but in the broader community as well. And it definitely seems like those are relationships that you both are working to form on individual levels between people, but that, as you said, Vanessa, people also have impact on organizations, and so sort of each individual person that you work with, student, adult, has people that they influence, and have ripple effects that can move out, which must be an amazing feeling, to sort of see as your students grow up, Celene, and even not. I mean, because we've seen a lot of young people making huge societal changes, right? But see kind of the effects that your work has had on them must be really incredible. Are there any instances that you can think of that have really kind of made you feel like, okay, this is good. I'm feeling good about this.
Yeah. I'm thinking as Vanessa talked about earlier, helping people move through the binary thinking. And some of my work with youth has been helping them see my religion is beautiful. It's so meaningful to me. And wow, my friend's religion is so important to them. And I see the beauty in their tradition and how it manifests in their life. I appreciate this about their tradition. And so some of that ability to say, yes, this is my tradition for me, and I appreciate it, but then also having that wider ability to value someone else's sacred practices. And it's so very basic, but also that means if you can value it and see it, the importance of the practice in that person's life or the belief in that person's life, it allows you to have a respect for it and or an admiration for the dedication of that person to their practice. And it just gives another way. So even if there are instances of kind of theological exclusionary thinking, that sometimes actually that thinking can simultaneously coexist with an appreciation for a different way. And so, some people are naturally more pluralistic and they can kind of expand their sort of worldview horizon to incorporate the validity of other theological ways of thinking. But for other people, it's being able to sort of appreciate at this one level removed is actually quite a good progression from where they might have been before, which is just to not see the value in other traditions. And that's all in the abstract, but I've kind of seen that manifest in people's lives as they've just been exposed. And sometimes exposure makes you think, "Oh, I'm glad I don't have that practice in my tradition," or that seems awful or difficult or not useful. But that's kind of being able to kind of discern what one does appreciate for oneself. I see that also as part of this greater self-awareness that can be useful in life. So, many people wouldn't want to fast for an entire month and see that a grueling process, but maybe they could see how that process helps me improve my discipline or, something. So yeah, I think we can be appreciative or critical in an empathetic kind of way.
Mhm. Mhm. And this kind of knowledge, I think, helps you analyze, your own identity as well. To one of the things that I love about the sisterhood is that I'm constantly learning new information about Judaism. I'm not an expert in anything, but certainly not in Judaism. And so I'm always learning new things, and some of the things I identify with, and some of them I don't. But the things that I do or don't, it's really valuable, I find, to gain that knowledge about my own religion, and that it helps me be even more empathetic about other religions, and sort of how you can, there are things that you can agree with and things that maybe aren't part of your personal practice for your
Mhm.
religion, and that there's other people that are like that as well. Have you found that as well, that this sort of empathy has also led to introspection as well?
Yeah, certainly. Absolutely. And even within our discrete religions, right, there's so many ways to be, which is I think what you're pointing to. So it helps with this discernment process to see how other people in other traditions have negotiated some of these same choices about how to inhabit their religious identity in the world.
So we have something that we joke about in the sisterhood, that sometimes our intrafaith conversations are more fiery than our
Yeah.
interfaith conversations, because we're really exploring our identities and our emotions and our ways of worshiping that what we're worshiping in different ways, so and different laws and all this. So it really is opening this whole world of layers and layers of identity and our understanding of ourselves and each other.
Absolutely. And I'll say for me, growing up Jewish and conservative, we were kosher, we observed all the high holidays, and I'm not sure I knew why we did any of that. And I still struggle with, why am I doing this? Well, because I grew up this way, this is part of my identity. I feel like it's a connection to my past and to my family and to my community, my tribe, if you will, right? But and of course, we're not given the why for all of the things that we do. It's because we're commanded, and I still struggle with that sometimes because my kids ask me, and I wanna be able to say, we do this because not just we're commanded, but because but I'm making it up or referring to an ancient philosopher or rabbi, and, it's that's part of just kind of my own, call it, wrestling with God or wrestling with my religion, and interfaith always brings that up too. I mean, I don't think I'm the first person who would admit this, but if I go to so I'm kind we don't eat pork in my house, we don't mix milk with meat, but I'm not particularly, like, strict when we're out on what people do, but I will notice if there's, like, a Caesar salad with chicken, and now I've learned actually mayonnaise is egg, it's not dairy. It was very interesting. I didn't know that, so for all the Jews in the room, especially if you're from New York, I was like, "Why don't we put mayonnaise on sandwiches?" So, very interesting. At least I need to research this more. But anyway, there are things that it almost makes you think, well, I need to be able to represent Judaism a little better than maybe even what I would normally do in my house. And that's a strange place to be as well. So it's always this interfaith is always a journey of self-reflection, and it's getting deeper and deeper into these questions of, you know, who am I as a Jewish person in private, in public, in my own community versus with a mixed community, a mixed religious community. So it's always there. And I hope that's a good thing. I feel like it's part of a growth process and
As long as we're seeking, we're doing a right thing, right? That journey is what's important, right? As we seek. So yes.
Well,
Uh,
I just could I follow up on that quickly? Because I think that's part of what is so necessary to be in these spaces is this sort of growth mentality. Because you have to be willing to learn something about another person, another tradition, another community, but also have that reflexive learning as well, and to be open to the fact that you might learn something about yourself and your own tradition, and that for people is a real space of vulnerability, especially if they're used to showing up in spaces as the person who knows it all or has it all together or has it all figured out. And interreligious learning, to me, it's sort of exciting because you're learning about yourself, you're learning about the other person, you're learning about history, and so there's just so much. It points to this process-based living where you're always kind of coming into new knowledge and a new way of seeing yourself and other people.
Mm, that makes me think of something. Actually, I have two questions are in my head as both of you are speaking, but I just want to follow up. The for a long time, interfaith dialogue was seen as something where you create this safe space and we all come together to explore similarities and come to mutual understanding, which is a beautiful part of this work. And I think it will always be there and it needs to continue. At the same time, even with the sisterhood, what we are kind of putting more and more emphasis on is really creating a brave space at the same time as creating that safe space. And this is a phrase that I've used a lot, but leaning into your discomfort, right?
Mhm.
Being creating a space where you indeed can come and be vulnerable, feel some discomfort, which kind of leads to this change, or this sort of transformation. So I kind of overall, do you see that as sort of interfaith dialogue, a new version of interfaith dialogue, overall, that are you observing that in the communities you're working with
Mm.
at the moment?
Yes, we have. So we revised our training for the Hallmark program, for this round, and I'm not sure why, because I don't think it's just the revisions that we did, but we do get a lot deeper into the self-understanding and listening and various things like that. But people have been in our current course really saying when they're uncomfortable, "Oh, something that person wrote in the chat or something they said." I've had a few instances of it. They said, "That seemed to me like a filter." And then we get to talk about it a little bit, and maybe they have identified something. The person has to identify it for themselves as a filter, but or it seems like a generalization. Like we had someone who mentioned something about how America and Americans didn't seem hospitable to did he say immigrants? I think he did say immigrants, and not necessarily the media, but I think that's his experience. And someone said, "I'm American, and that's certainly not reflective of where I stand." And that made me uncomfortable because so that was an example. But I thought that was great that people really felt, and I think safe space creates a brave space because it's got to be really safe in order
Mhm.
for people to be brave. And I
Mhm.
have seen that, and I think it's really fantastic. It's brought the group closer together as opposed to really the superficial,
Yeah.
nicey nice, right?
So Donna Hicks, who works at the Weatherhead Center at Harvard University, she is a conflict negotiator and has worked with groups all over the world who are in civil conflict situations or geopolitical other forms of nation state disputes. And she has this workout on dignity. And so when we're thinking about what creates a brave space for people, it's knowing that they're dignity, even when there's productive disagreements, that people will be dignified to one another, or there's at least a framework to talk about maybe our basic human need for having our dignity respected. And that has been useful to me because I'm able to think about productive conflict as a space where people still feel dignified and heard and seen and acknowledged. And uh, Donna Hicks has these components of dignity that are, I think, somewhat universal, although we could talk about that. And then she has outlined these practices that disrupt dignity. And so that to me, if spaces can and people can have a common language around when something hurts and why it hurt, then there's at least a kind of a framework. Because if you have brave spaces, they can easily devolve. And so there's kind of has to be always this kind of core agreement, and I know all of us do that in our dialogue work to say that here, here are the rules of this space. And
Mhm.
the rules, it's not that conflict can happen, but here's how we manage it when it
Right.
does.
That's right. I'm taking notes, so these are great resources both of you are mentioning, and I think we're going to explore them more, definitely, for everything we're doing. Ellie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just was, wondering, the sisterhood obviously is a group of women, and religion, there are a lot of male leaders, in religion, and it's only kind of been recently that there have been more women leaders. I know that going really far back, that there were a lot of women leaders in Islam as well, but so often I think interfaith areas are kind of can be male spaces as well. Is this something that you found? And as women, how have you kind of navigated that? And are there sort of things about interfaith that you think women are better at, or is that a gross generalization, which
I
could
love
also
this
be
question because
true
part of
and
my
not
academic
true?
work is on women in gender and religious leadership. So it's a question I think about as I'm sleeping. So part of my work has actually been to expand the notion of leadership, to point out these things that historically women have been doing, continue to do, excel at doing, and then also expand sort of the gender notions of what people can do based on their biological sex. And so I've been tackling it from both dimensions to point to the work that women have long been doing that is absolutely essential, even if it's not recognized in official titles and jobs that provide salaries. But I think, this is it's a contentious issue within the Muslim community because there are certain roles, not too many of them, but enough of them that are seen as somehow better suited to men. And part of my discernment work as a religious leader in some capacity of my own is to draw boundaries for myself, think about how I want to talk about that work, which ones I think I want to push up against because they seem unjust or somehow inhibiting, which ones that I kind of am okay with and think that they add value to our communal life, and or that they're binding somehow in a framework that's determined by religious law or otherwise by custom. So it's very complicated to break down these different arenas of leadership and to sort out what is divinely ordained, what is agreed upon by the community and somehow valuable, and then what is pure chauvinism or misogynistic attitudes. And that's, I think, for me, it's still a little bit of a work in progress. And also I have to field, let's just say, other people's opinions of how I show up in the world and do my work as an academic, as a spiritual care provider. So it's both a theoretical process and a lived experience that is playing out over time.
Thank you, Celene. I'm gonna give a much more, I would say just, uh, an example from my experience, so to appreciate the contrast as well, because you've done so much work on this, and, just my experience of my community's, gender gender assumptions and characteristics and such, I don't find they apply in my programs. I have had we happen to have more women in our program now. We have, I think, 4 men in our program and 21 women, so it's a big gap, but it hasn't been like that for our other programs. It's the current manifestation, and you know, I think those gender characteristics, what even are they anymore? Men are intellectual, women are emotional. I mean, if we look at that, none of that, it all breaks down in our room. And I think that's number one, we are heart centered. So when people show up, we all speak from the I. We all share about our past month and what we've noticed. We all express gratitude and debrief the site experiences. We all do that. So it could be that it's just our structure, but I don't really think so at the end of the day. People show up really very equally in our space. And I think it's phenomenal, and that's really all I can say about it. I think we had more men in a couple of instances in Connecticut in our program, but, and we work with lay leaders, of course, so they're lay leaders appointed by clergy, and I think it's just a matter of the capacity of the lay leader to be able to be in our program. I am a part of a couple of clergy associations that I'm in the Northeast, so we're pretty liberal around here in general, and so we typically have a split gender community. You know, we've got many women in the room and probably equal numbers of men. Yeah, it hasn't shown up for me. I do say I love the space that we're in. I have found, that there are certain, things that women are doing that are just for women as well that I appreciate. Conversations like the sisterhood. And I do appreciate that. I think it's a wonderful space for sharing what it is to go through the things that we go through. I'm not gonna say it in any more detail than that.
And I think
Can you
it
edit that part out?
because this is I love sharing in these conversations. That's what we need. So, but I just, it reminds me of what something that Celene said. Whether it's, different faiths or different genders, that sort of binary, approach to,
Yeah.
as long as we are focusing on that dignity, I love that, recognizing that dignity, everything else falls into place, right? As long as that dignity is recognized and protected, we can talk about differences and we can continue to explore with each other. But so thank you. I and Vanessa, it's fantastic to hear that you really didn't experience much of this in your work. It's very encouraging, and I'm happy to hear that. And Celene, I know you brought in your book and your study, you brought some archetypes of Muslim women through history and what they represent for us. So I think that's amazing to read and learn from. So I wanted to also just sort of continue. We don't have much more time, and this has been wonderful, and we're learning so much from both of you. I wanted to ask you. So, for longest time, this sort of a division between secular and sacred, or faith and secular, or you don't mix these two. So, what would you, especially the moment we're in right now, there are layers to this sort of division or lack of division, or where we are at. If you could just say, in this sociopolitical context, what do you see as the main role of faith and faith based institutions?
So I'd say secularity itself is a worldview. And part of, I think, what I try to do with my students is to realize that whether they label their worldview as explicitly religious or not, they have a worldview. It's been shaped by their prior experiences. They come with certain assumptions about how things work, what is important, they have a moral framework or moral framework in formation. And so I think that if if religious people are adding this really fascinating to me dimension of the conversation, what matters in life? What is our ethical framework? What are our moral values? How do we hold what is important to us in conversation with what is important to the people around us in these existential terms? That's what I would hope, that we can be a model for people who come from other worldviews to also feel like, yeah, they're part of a conversation that is unfolding throughout history. It's not that there are kind of secular people and religious people, that even people who have more secular worldviews are influenced and influence people who have religious worldviews. So I see it as very fluid. And, to me, that's super interesting and kind of a point in which maybe in the contemporary world, so much of religious practice is about forming the self in a way that balances kind of self-interest with interest for the other, or balances kind of the need to live a good life with the need to help other people live a good life. And I think some of that, the ways in which religious frameworks oftentimes point towards balance and emotional stability and introspection. And these are all qualities that we see that secular people, even when they don't ascribe to a specific religious framework, value. They value moments of introspection. They value deep relationships. They value being reassured or being seen and heard. And so how we achieve these common kind of human goals for wellness, flourishing. And that to me is a dialogue that we can have no matter what background we come from.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I do agree, Celene. I think you put that very well. I would add one dimension, which is community, which is, of course, what we focus on at my organization, and just the experience of isolation and loneliness that people experience to an exponential degree these days. And I don't say that just about older generations. I think young people are experiencing that as well. And so, I've always seen religions as fundamental to humans' abilities to be in community. And I'll take everything that Celene said, and there are secular versions and ways to be part of community as well. I think religions have a structure for doing that that can be learned from also. So if my whole house is sick with COVID, it's our religious communities that drop bread and soup at our door. And that is so meaningful to be feeling cared for in one's life. It's so important and being able to return that. So I think community for me is something secular or religious, is something that we all need to focus on. I also think that religious communities, because they're already formed and this is part of their very mission, is to help rebuild our social fabric. I think we need that. I think religious communities can also learn from how do we build trust across difference and listen, all the kinds of work that we all do. I would like to see this really in all religious communities. Many of them do it very well, and many of them don't do it very well. But this is what it's going to take to help rebuild the trust that I think we've lost, and rebuild the feelings of togetherness that are devastating us. Frankly, I think they're devastating us.
You're so right, Vanessa, to point to communities, and it's not just like local communities or those interpersonal relationships, but our healthcare infrastructure, our education infrastructure in this country, it's built on kind of religious communities. And so it to ask that question, sort of who do we want to be together as a society? That's I think the question that many of us are kind of trying to ask. And it's easy to point to how religion is dividing us, but there's so many ways that the commitments of religious people to serve their own communities and people beyond their own communities is holding up the social fabric in some ways.
Keeping the focus on beautiful. Everything you said is just so beautiful, and I just want to say, all of us keeping in mind that focus on equality, right? Rather, like, not looking at, that one faith tradition or religion is there is superiority over, as long as we're focusing on that dignity again and
Mm.
equality and good for all. That's and the best methods are really coming from many faith communities to do exactly that. So
Mm. Thank you so much for having us. I always learn in conversation with you, and I'm so inspired by the work of the sisterhood. And it's nitty gritty every day, navigating challenges and visioning what a future would be where there is more collaboration and more cooperation among Muslim Jewish communities. So I appreciate that so much, and you make me hopeful, even if my students sometimes are not. I will try to keep passing on that hope.
likewise, your work, both of you, just beauty of your sharing and your work and your spirit, both of you, is just so encouraging and inspiring, and really helps us all do what we do on a daily basis. So we're very grateful for
I
this.
learned so much from you, from your wisdom, from your stories about your experiences, your resources you shared with us. So we very much appreciate your hard won time with us.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be speaking with you and seeing you. And I hope that there are many more opportunities for us to catch up and get together. I admire your work as well. I'm in the trenches with y'all. And I really this is I hope, and I know, every day we wake up, it's a new day and another chance to tackle these really big problems that we have and celebrate the amazing things that happen in the sisterhood spaces and in our spaces and at Groton School, Celene, and all of the spaces where we're able to share and pass on what we're doing. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank
So
you.
great to be here.
Hope to see you very soon.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Are there any questions you've always wanted to ask a Jew or a Muslim, but didn't know how or where to go? Ask us at podcast@sosspeace.org. We don't speak for everyone in our communities, but we're happy to give you answers from our own perspectives. And to learn more about the sisterhood, subscribe to the newsletter on our website, sosspeace.org.
If this conversation moved you, challenged you, or made you think, we'd love for you to share it, leave a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The opinions of speakers and hosts do not always reflect official positions of the sisterhood. All rights to video and audio content belong to the sisterhood. Until next time, keep listening,
Keep learning,
and keep provoking peace.